A Saturday morning cartoon it was not. Jonny Quest premiered in primetime on ABC on September 18, 1964. Not between cereal commercials on a weekend. In actual primetime, Friday nights, alongside adult programming, competing for the same viewers who were watching dramas and westerns. It was the first primetime animated series ever to run in that slot. Not the Flintstones, not the Jetsons, Jonny Quest. And it was nothing like those shows. No talking animals, no comedy hijinks, no safe, sanitized, roly-poly cartoon universe where nobody ever really got hurt. Jonny Quest had henchmen getting choked out, villains falling to their deaths, a boy with a rifle and the government authority to use it. It was, for 6 months in 1964 and 1965, the most genuinely dangerous children's show in American television history. Today, 15 facts about the cartoon that changed what animation was allowed to be, starting with the man who built it from scratch in a Hanna-Barbera office, and ending with the reason why, 60 years later, animators who grew up watching it still cite it as the show that proved something nobody else believed. Stay until number 1. That one is about what the show's legacy actually produced. Let's count it down. 15. It was never supposed to be called Jonny Quest. The show's origin begins not with a boy named Johnny, but with a radio drama from the 1930s called Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy. Joseph Barbera, half of the legendary Hanna-Barbera partnership, had been told by Screen Gems president John Mitchell something that stuck with him. Mitchell said bluntly that Hanna-Barbera couldn't expect to do animal stories forever. The studio had built its reputation on the Flintstones and the Jetsons, comedies built around families and situations transplanted into fantastical settings. They were enormously profitable. They were also, in Mitchell's view, a lane that had a ceiling. Barbera wanted to develop a live-action style adventure series.
Dr. Quest here.
Benton, this is
inspired directly by Dr. No, the first James Bond film, which had debuted in 1962. He identified the Jack Armstrong radio property as the vehicle, a decades-old adventure serial about an all-American teenage hero tackling impossible problems around the world. He commissioned a short promotional film to demonstrate what the series could look like. Then, the rights negotiations collapsed. The Jack Armstrong property owners reportedly wanted too much money, and the deal fell apart completely. Barbera pivoted. He hired comic book artist Doug Wildey to take everything developed for the Jack Armstrong pitch and rebuild it from scratch. The character went through several early names, including Chip Ballou, which thankfully didn't survive, before settling on Jonny Quest. The name Quest came from the Los Angeles phone book, selected because it conveyed adventure. Johnny was suggested by Joe Barbera himself, shortened from Jonathan. The hovercraft sequence in the Jack Armstrong promotional film, 2 men fleeing native spear throwers as they returned to their airship, was never discarded. It ended up as part of the Jonny Quest closing credits, where it ran for the entire series. Tens of millions of viewers watched that closing sequence without ever knowing it was originally filmed for a completely different show that never existed. 14. The show was designed to look like nothing. Hanna-Barbera had ever made every Hanna-Barbera show before Jonny Quest was built on a specific philosophy of economy. Characters were designed to be animated as cheaply as possible. Limited movement, repeated cycles, simplified backgrounds. The studio had refined this approach into a genuinely profitable system. They could produce 30 episodes of The Flintstones for what other studios would spend on 15. The characters' thick outlines and exaggerated proportions weren't just an aesthetic choice. They were a budget strategy. Doug Wildey wasn't interested in any of that. Wildey came from comic book illustration. He had spent years drawing realistic human figures for serialized adventure comics. Dynamic bodies in authentic motion, detailed environments, characters whose faces conveyed specific emotions rather than broadly legible expressions. When Barbera handed him the Jonny Quest assignment, Wildey brought that sensibility directly into the design work. The result was a visual shock.
Look, a giant cave spider. They're deadly poisonous.
Characters in Jonny Quest had defined musculature, faces with shadows, environments that looked like actual places, deserts, jungles, harbors, Arctic wilderness, rather than simplified cartoon approximations of places. Race Bannon's character design was explicitly modeled on actor Jeff Chandler, a real human face used as the template for a cartoon character. The animators who had spent their careers drawing Hanna-Barbera's rounded, simple figures were, by multiple accounts, challenged by the demands of the new style. Wildy's own assessment, in a 1986 interview preserved by Cartoon Research, was characteristically blunt. These cartoonists had never worked illustratively. All they knew was the roly-poly figures. Bringing them up to the visual standard the show required was difficult, time-consuming, and, as it turned out, expensive in ways that would determine the show's fate. It cost Hanna-Barbera a fortune. It also produced something that looked genuinely unlike anything else on American television. That was the point, and it worked. 13. The voice of Jonny Quest became Otter in Animal House. Tim Matheson was 16 years old when he was hired to voice Jonny Quest, credited under the name Tim Matheson. His hiring reflected the production's commitment to authenticity. If the show was built on realism, then an 11-year-old boy should be voiced by an actual young person rather than an adult doing a child impression. Matheson's voice carried the unguarded quality of someone who hadn't learned to perform youth as a professional affectation. What makes this resonate decades later is what Matheson became.
Okay, check your safety belts. Let's go on down.
He stayed in entertainment, transitioned to on-screen performance, and built a substantial career. The moment most people recognize him from is his role as Eric Otter Stratton in National Lampoon's Animal House in 1978. Smooth, confident, and effortlessly charismatic in a way that defined an archetype for an entire generation. Both performances, separated by 14 years, share the same fundamental quality, a natural ease that makes you believe the character knows something everybody else doesn't. Matheson is still alive and has spoken warmly about the Jonny Quest experience, one of the last living connections to the original production. 12. The name Race Bannon was assembled from spare parts. Race Bannon, the square-jawed, third-degree judo black belt, Government Intelligence 1 agent who served simultaneously as Johnny's bodyguard, tutor, and all-purpose action hero, is one of the most memorable characters in Jonny Quest's ensemble. He is also, in a very literal sense, built from the leftovers of Doug Wildy's earlier unpublished work. Before Jonny Quest, Wildy had created 2 comic strip properties that never made it to production. One featured a character named Stretch Bannon, the other featured a character named Race Dunhill. Neither strip sold. Both characters sat in the drawer. When Wildy needed a name for the show's adult action hero, he combined what he had. Race from Race Dunhill, Bannon from Stretch Bannon. The result was Race Bannon, a name that sounds exactly like what a 1964 adventure serial character should sound like. Effortlessly cool, slightly implausible, perfectly calibrated for the genre. The character's visual design was then modeled on Jeff Chandler, a real Hollywood actor known for rugged leading man roles in westerns and adventure films. Wildy's approach to naming throughout the show followed this same logic of purposeful resonance. The name Quest came from the phone book because it sounded adventurous.
3 kids ago at least. These 2 are with me. What about her?
Race Bannon sounded like a man who could defuse a bomb while teaching algebra. The show's character roster was built from a combination of deliberate invention and creative salvage, and it worked precisely because the names felt right, even before the characters earned them. 11. The show was the first primetime animated drama in the world. This is the fact that most people who grew up watching Jonny Quest on Saturday morning syndication reruns have no idea about. The show didn't debut on Saturday morning. It premiered in ABC's primetime Friday night lineup, in a slot designed for adult viewers, making it the first primetime animated drama in the history of world television. Not just American television, the world. The distinction between animated drama and animated comedy matters here. The Flintstones had been running in ABC primetime since 1960, making it the first successful primetime animated series. But The Flintstones was a pure domestic comedy. It was, functionally, the honeymooners dressed in Stone Age clothing. Jonny Quest was something else, a dramatic adventure serial, structured like live-action espionage and thriller programming, built to hold adult attention through narrative tension rather than comedic rhythm. The decision to put the show in primetime reflected Barbera's belief that an adventure series could hold adult audiences in a way that animation had never previously demonstrated. He was partially right. The show did attract adult viewers, parents who found themselves genuinely intrigued rather than simply tolerating what their children were watching. Critics responded positively. The ratings were described as decent. It wasn't enough to survive the cost, but the ambition of that placement was real, and it changed how television producers thought about what animation was allowed to attempt.
Well, that's roughly the idea.
If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of animation's most fascinating and underdocumented stories, subscribe. We cover the shows that shaped how television works every week. 10. The show was canceled because it was too good to afford. Here is a fact that sits in counterintuitive territory. Jonny Quest was canceled not because it failed, but because it succeeded too completely at doing something Hanna-Barbera couldn't sustain financially. The show aired 26 episodes across its single primetime season. It was well-reviewed. It attracted a loyal audience. ABC wanted a second season, and according to accounts from the production's history, said so explicitly. William Hanna said no. His reasoning, confirmed by multiple people involved with the production, was simple. The show was too expensive. Hanna-Barbera's entire business model was built on producing animation quickly and cheaply. The studio had refined a system that could produce enormous quantities of content at manageable cost. Jonny Quest, with its realistic character animation, detailed backgrounds, and dramatically complex staging, broke that system entirely. Every episode cost more than the studio could absorb at the scale the show demanded. The animators themselves had struggled with the realistic style. As one production account describes it, the people who had spent their careers drawing simplified figures were challenged to produce the kind of detailed, naturalistic movement Wildey's designs required. The labor hours were substantially higher than on any previous Hanna-Barbera production. Hanna understood what a second season would cost. He looked at the numbers and declined. The show was canceled, not because audiences rejected it, not because the network lost interest, but because the studio that made it couldn't afford to keep making it at the level of quality the first season had established. 26 episodes, one season, canceled by its own excellence. 9. Doug Wildey had to fight for a created by credit. The story of Jonny Quest's creator credit is one of the more revealing windows into how Hollywood treated its creative talent in the early 1960s, and it's a story that echoes uncomfortably through the industry's history with artists and writers. Doug Wildey created the characters. He designed the visual language. He established the tone, the structure, the specific combination of Bond-era spy thriller and pulp adventure serial that made the show unlike anything else. He wrote the initial presentation that sold advertisers on the concept. He was, by any reasonable creative definition, the show's creator. Hanna-Barbera was initially reluctant to give him a formal created by credit. The studio's perspective, as it was in most animation productions of the era, was that work done by an employee for hire belonged to the employer. Creative credit was understood differently than it is today. Studios routinely retained ownership of concepts developed internally without formally acknowledging individual contributors. The produced and directed by credits for Hanna and Barbera appeared in larger type than Wildey's contributions throughout the show's original run. Wildey pushed back. Eventually, the studio capitulated and gave him a credit, though the specific language varied between episodes, sometimes acknowledging him as supervising art director and sometimes using based on ideas created by. It was not always the clean, unambiguous created by Doug Wildey that the franchise now regularly acknowledges. Wildey died in 1994, the show he built from a canceled Jack Armstrong pitch, and 2 years of deliberate, difficult design work outlived him as a franchise, a cultural touchstone, and an influence on animation that continues to be acknowledged by artists working today. 8. The show made parents furious, and that made kids love it more. Jonny Quest became a target of parental watchdog group action for children's television, a significant consumer advocacy organization of the era that had real influence over network programming decisions. The complaint was violence, not cartoon violence in the Looney Tunes tradition of anvils and dynamite, where the consequences were always temporary and the tone was always comic. Real violence, Race Bannon choking out henchmen with his bare hands, villains falling from significant heights and not getting back up, firearms being handled and fired by an 11-year-old and his 12-year-old brother.
I'll stay here while you hop down and get the boys. I'll need their help getting the balloon.
Episodes featuring murder attempts on the main cast, deadly monsters, and Cold War paranoia rendered in vivid action-adventure terms. The parental outrage was understandable in context. American children's television in the early 1960s operated under broadcast standards that reflected a specific cultural consensus about what children's entertainment should contain. Jonny Quest operated as though those standards didn't apply. Not defiantly exactly, but with the confidence of creators who were making a show for primetime adult audiences and happened to include children in that number. The show attracted devoted young viewers precisely because it didn't patronize them. Where other cartoons simplified the world for children, Jonny Quest complicated it. The villains were genuinely dangerous. The situations had real stakes. When Race Bannon pointed a weapon at someone, the visual language communicated that this was serious, not a joke. The watchdog groups eventually prevailed in ways that shaped the show's later revivals. The 1986 reboot deliberately toned down the violence to comply with the broadcast standards of a new era. But the original 26 episodes remained exactly as they had been made, and every generation that discovered them in syndication felt the same thing the original audience had felt. This show takes you seriously. 7. Hajji may have been the first non-white protagonist in American animation. This is a fact worth sitting with carefully, because the show's treatment of Hajji is genuinely complicated, and both the complication and the significance deserve honest accounting. Hajji Singh was an 11-year-old orphan from Calcutta, adopted by Dr. Benton Quest and brought into the Quest family as Johnny's brother and best friend. In his design, his voice performance by Danny Bravo, and his role within the group's adventures,
All of you.
How'd you get here?
Oh, probably the same way you did.
Hajji was presented as an equal to Johnny, equally capable, differently skilled, with his own personality and his own episode in Season 1 dedicated entirely to his origin story. Doug Wildey has been quoted as saying he wanted to add a minority character to the ensemble, and specifically that he wanted someone who would bring a different perspective than what he described as a stereotypical approach. The specifics of how Hajji's character was developed are complex. The character's mystical abilities, his turban, and certain cultural details around him reflect the Orientalist sensibility of 1964 American popular culture in ways that later audiences and critics have reasonably noted. The show was not immune to the assumptions of its era, but in the specific context of 1964 American animation, Hajji's presence was genuinely unusual. He was not a comic sidekick. He was not an ethnic caricature inserted for comic relief. He was a co-protagonist with active agency in the show's plots, a best friend rather than a background character, and an adopted family member whose status within the Quest household was treated as straightforwardly equal. He may well have been the first non-white lead character in American animation history. For children watching in 1964, particularly children of color who had seen their own faces reflected back from American television in limited and often demeaning ways, that was not nothing. It was, given the specific context of the year it aired, genuinely ahead of where the culture was. 6. The show was essentially a James Bond film for children. The timing was not a coincidence. Dr. No, the first James Bond film, opened in the United States in May 1963. It was a phenomenon. High-tech spy thriller, exotic locations, a protagonist who combined physical competence with scientific intelligence, villains with grandiose plans for world domination.
Dad and Race ever hit this part of shore, they'll know we're around. We hope.
A specific tone that balanced danger with a kind of cool invulnerability. American audiences were captivated. Joe Barbera watched it and understood that the elements driving Bond's appeal, the international adventure, the technological sophistication, the combination of action and intellect, were translatable to animation. The first Jonny Quest episode's plot directly echoed Dr. No in structure. Ships disappearing in a mysterious part of the ocean, a secret villain operating from a hidden base, high-tech weaponry. The villain's laser device was even drawn partly in reference to a gadget from Goldfinger, which was being released in the UK at the exact moment the first Quest episode was in production. The design of Dr. Quest's laboratory, with its clean, modernist lines and expensive-looking research equipment, was influenced by Ken Adams' production designs for the Bond films, the same visual vocabulary of Cold War scientific power translated into animated form. But Jonny Quest did something Bond couldn't. It put the audience inside the adventure rather than having them watch it from the outside. Jonny was the audience. He was the child who got to go along. Every impossible location, every confrontation with evil, every moment of genuine danger was experienced through the eyes of an 11-year-old boy, which made it viscerally more immediate for the young viewers who found the show and never quite forgot it. Bond had the Aston Martin. Quest had a hydrofoil, a jet, and a dog named Bandit. Different league, same idea. 5. The theme music was composed in the shadow of Goldfinger. Hoyt Curtin composed the Jonny Quest theme in 1964, and the result is one of the most kinetically effective pieces of television music ever written for an animated series. Curtin was Hanna-Barbera's in-house composer. He scored The Flintstones, The Jetsons, and virtually every major Hanna-Barbera production of the 1960s. For Jonny Quest, he was specifically instructed to create something that conveyed the show's unique combination of danger, sophistication, and global scale. The result drew directly from the brass-heavy, rhythmically aggressive scoring style that John Barry had developed for the Bond films. Curtin's theme opens with those percussive brass hits, accelerates into a driving melody line, and communicates within its first 10 seconds exactly what kind of show you're about to watch. The theme was not just background music, it was atmosphere. The show's producers understood that the music was doing as much work as the visuals in establishing the show's identity as something qualitatively different from everything else on children's television. Curtin's theme has been cited by composers working on action animation decades later
Can't think of a thing, Doctor.
See you later.
So long.
as a direct influence. Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, the producers of Batman, the animated series in the early 1990s, widely considered the greatest American animated series ever made, have both acknowledged Jonny Quest as a foundational influence on their work. The tone they were reaching for in Batman, cinematic, serious, unapologetically dangerous, was the tone Wildey and Curtin had established in 1964 with a comic book artist's drawings and a jazz-inflected brass theme that still sounds urgent 60 years later. 4. The closing credits contained footage from a show that never existed. Every episode of the original Jonny Quest series ended with the same brief closing credit sequence: 2 men in a hovercraft fleeing a group of natives throwing spears, escaping to an airship above. It ran for every single episode of the show's 26-episode run. None of those people were Jonny Quest characters. That footage was never from a Jonny Quest episode. It was not animation produced for the show. It came from the Jack Armstrong promotional film, the 2-minute presentation Hanna-Barbera had produced to pitch the Jack Armstrong adaptation before the rights negotiations fell through, and the whole project was repurposed into Jonny Quest. When that promotional material was abandoned, the footage was recycled into the new show's closing credits rather than discarded. Nobody told the viewers. There was no explanation. The sequence simply played at the end of every episode as though it were part of the Jonny Quest universe, which it categorically was not. The irony is that this piece of footage, which technically belongs to a show that was never made,
And bad luck to the tiger.
featuring characters from a property Hanna-Barbera couldn't license, is one of the most vividly remembered visual elements of the original Jonny Quest experience for many viewers of a certain age. It's part of how people remember the show ending. It's part of the show's aesthetic identity. It was always from somewhere else, and nobody knew. 3. The DVD release quietly censored the original episodes. When Warner Brothers finally released the complete original Jonny Quest series on DVD in 2004, fans who had waited years found something unexpected. Certain episodes had been silently altered. Dialogue had been removed from at least 2 episodes, Pursuit of the Poho and Monster in the Monastery. To address content the studio identified as negatively stereotyping Indigenous and Asian characters. The changes were not announced, not disclosed in the packaging, and not accompanied by any explanation. The decision reflected genuine tensions in the show's legacy. Jonny Quest was a product of 1964, of Cold War America, of an adventure serial tradition built partly on colonialist assumptions about the world. Some of the show's content involving non-Western characters reflects that context in ways that are genuinely uncomfortable by later standards. But the silent removal of dialogue from archival material without acknowledgement or context struck critics and fans as the wrong response. The irony of altering a show about a truth-seeking scientist
Terrific race. Come on. Swim, race. Swim.
by quietly hiding the truth was not lost on the show's most devoted advocates. The The appropriate response to troubling historical content, most argued, was transparency, not excision. The Blu-ray release addressed some of these concerns, but the 2004 DVD set remains a document of a specific cultural moment, the desire to preserve a beloved artifact while quietly managing its most uncomfortable edges. 2. The show was canceled, forgotten, and then became immortal. Like MASH before it and Star Trek after it, Jonny Quest's cultural life was almost inverse to its commercial trajectory. During its primetime run, it was reviewed positively but never dominant. After cancellation, it went into Saturday morning syndication reruns, and that's where it found the audience that would carry it through 6 decades. The rerun experience changed the show's relationship with American children in ways the original primetime slot never could. Primetime audiences came and went. Saturday morning syndication ran for years, cycling through the same 26 episodes repeatedly, finding new generations of children every few years who encountered the show fresh. Each new generation had the same experience, the discovery that this cartoon was unlike the others, that it respected them enough to put real danger in the frame, that the adventure was genuinely adventurous, the science had real-world grounding, and the characters, for all the era's limitations, were people rather than types. The show was revived in 1986, again in 1992 and 1995 for television films, and once more in 1996 for a full series revival called The Real Adventures of Jonny Quest. None of these revivals matched the original, which is common with beloved properties. The 1986 version toned down the violence significantly, a product of changed broadcast standards and a different cultural climate. The 1996 version attempted a more contemporary aesthetic. Neither had the specific electricity of the original 26 episodes, but the franchise survived them all because the original was genuinely irreplaceable, and the children who had grown up on syndication reruns knew the difference. The show that proved animation could be art. And here is what Jonny Quest actually did, beyond the entertainment, beyond the cultural impact, beyond the nostalgia that makes it worth
And what are the extras?
Buttons and zippers.
documenting 60 years later. In 1964, the assumption in American popular culture was that animation was for children, that animated characters were by definition cartoonish, and that the vocabulary of illustrated storytelling was fundamentally incompatible with the emotional and narrative seriousness that adults expected from their drama. Doug Wildey disagreed. He was a comic book artist who had spent his career illustrating human beings in motion, dynamic, specific, expressive human. Beings whose faces and bodies communicated things that words couldn't. He brought that conviction directly into Jonny Quest's visual design. Characters who looked like people, environments that felt like places, lighting and shadow that suggested weight and atmosphere. The animators working under him found it difficult. The studio found it expensive. William Hanna found it unsustainable. And yet the 26 episodes that resulted from that specific, difficult, expensive choice became the proof of concept that animation had been waiting for. Batman. The animated series in 1992, widely considered the gold standard of American adventure animation, was explicitly influenced by Jonny Quest. Bruce Timm and his collaborators cited the show directly. The cinematic ambition, the willingness to take the material seriously, the refusal to condescend to the audience, all of it traced back to what Wildey had argued for in that Hanna-Barbera studio in 1963. The influence runs forward through every serious animated series made since, every animated drama that treats its audience as intelligent, every action cartoon that uses shadow and pacing and genuine consequence to build emotional stakes, every production team that has fought a studio's cost-cutting instincts to protect the visual integrity of what they were making. They are all, in some sense, arguing the same argument Doug Wildey made with Jonny Quest. That animation can be art, that children watching a cartoon deserve the same quality of storytelling as adults watching a drama, that the standard of realistic human characters in a real but extraordinary world was worth the cost. 26 episodes, 1 season, canceled for being too good to afford, and still arguing its case 60 years later. 15 facts, 1 show, and a question worth settling in the comments. Is the original 1964 Jonny Quest still the best version, or does one of the revivals actually get close? Drop your answer, subscribe for more of this. We'll be back next week.